way I see sheriffs, like the Alberta police force, I definitely see that in a different way now. Like, it scares me now whenever I see a sheriff. I don't have much respect for them now because of what they've done to me.
You may recall the story of Jeremiah Lusing. He's a young farm boy in rural Alberta who was pulled out of his tractor by his neck, pushed onto the pavement, and given scars that he has to this day. He was also punched in the face by Alberta sheriffs in an act of police brutality that is rarely seen in Alberta. Problem is, regular social justice warriors, folks who are opposed to police brutality, they weren't really interested in this case because Jeremiah was a white farm boy from rural Alberta. He was a Catholic. He doesn't fit the bill that Black Lives Matter really is interested in today. But police brutality of any kind is a problem. And this, what happened to Jeremiah, was particularly egregious. The news today, well, the government of Alberta, their prosecutors, have dropped all charges against Jeremiah and the charges that were ascribed to his brother. I spoke with them today at their farm. They took a few minutes out of their harvest to speak with me about what went on and why they think the charges were dropped.
Well, I'm sure they saw the situation I was in and everything that happened to me, and they, all the support I'm getting, like from Rebel and everyone else, and that's mostly one of the reasons why they probably thought about dropping it, because they don't need all this trouble, especially when the court date comes.
These are really great folks out here. They're doing great work feeding the country, and they're not at all the type of people that Alberta sheriffs or law enforcement should be prosecuting and giving criminal charges to. And it's really confusing why Minister Doug Schweitzer, who was then the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General for Alberta, didn't immediately throw out these charges. It took Minister Casey Madu, the individual who replaced Minister Doug Schweitzer as Minister of Justice and Attorney General, to have these charges completely thrown out. I was grateful that I was able to speak with Jeremiah here today. The first time I came out to their farm to do the initial story on this, he was still too traumatized by what happened to speak on camera. He was also worried with pending criminal charges that he might incriminate himself. Since those charges have been dropped, he was happy to speak with me, and I was really glad we were able to tell his story fully, to let Albertans and Canadians know exactly what the consequences are for having a police force that is so out of touch with rural Alberta. The RCMP ships in officers from Montreal to police rural southern Alberta, central Alberta, northern Alberta, across the country. They're shuffling a deck of officers. Now, the problem with Alberta sheriffs is they're not equipped at all to be dealing with rural Alberta either. Their jobs typically are dealing with VIP protection, protecting courthouses, prisoner transfer, and for some reason they're also tasked with doing check stops in the middle of rural Alberta, a place that they rarely even visit, much less understand the customs and the law. See, the tractor that Jeremiah was in wasn't subject to the same laws that vehicles that everyday folks drive on the highways is. You don't even need a driver's license or a license plate to operate those vehicles, the tractor. But the police didn't know that, and the consequences were dangerous and violent for Jeremiah, leaving a scar that he has to this day.
When I was approaching the check stop, which I didn't know what it was because I was too far away from the sign just to read check stop on it. I saw the lights though, and there's probably about 10 vehicles, 9 or 8, 10 vehicles lined up, so the sign was still too far away to see when I approached the lineup. And then like, oh, my field's just down the road a little bit. I might as well just take the ditch the rest of the way, hit my field. So I got into the ditch, and as I was driving in the ditch, I saw this check stop sign, and like, oh, so I'll just keep driving till I get there and see what happens. And when I got to there's a crossroad, when I got to just about where the crossroad was, there's a sheriff waving me to stop, and he had a mask on and gloves, so I thought this had to do something with COVID maybe, actually, like checking for COVID breath. And I'm not going to stop in the ditch because there's quite a steep slope there. It's just too dangerous. So I drove up on top of the crossroad, and I thought I'd maybe stop there. And I wasn't even barely on the crossroad, and a sheriff comes behind the vehicle and just slams the fender as hard as he can. And that's what made me mad. And like, it scared me at first, like, what the heck is he doing? And I look behind me and there's a sheriff there. And so I stopped the vehicle, and the tractor rolled to a stop. And I opened my door and asked him what he wanted. And then I couldn't quite make out the words he said, but I know from hearing the recording later, he said this is a mandatory alcohol screening check stop, but I never heard those words. The tractor, he was still too far away, and the tractor was running. And then when he finally came to about where the door is, I could hear him better. And he asked me to shut the tractor off. And I said no, because you got to put the park brake on, then give it a few minutes to cool, then I can shut it off safely and then walk out of the tractor. And so I declined that. And then he asked me to do a breathalyzer, which I still thought was for COVID-19, because, you know, they're wearing masks and gloves and all that stuff. And like, what would they be doing? Why would they be doing breathalyzers for alcohol when there's COVID going on?
Yeah.
And so I said no to that. And then he asked me maybe one or two more times, and I said no. And then he asked me to, or actually he never asked me. He asked me 1 or 2 times, and then I said no. And then right away after that, he said, "You're under arrest," and he climbed into the tractor like really fast and started grabbing me. And, you know, I'm like, whoa, the park brake's not on, the tractor's not even off. You think I'm getting out of the tractor like that? It could roll, it could do anything. It's dangerous. And so I was holding onto the steering wheel and the seat. Like, I'm not getting out of the tractor in this situation. And then a sheriff came up from behind him and gave me a good whap in the face with his fist. And that's when I started bleeding, because, you know, he hit my nose real good and my whole face right here. And so there's blood going everywhere, and then I was choking on blood, and then the sheriff pushes my face to the ground. And so and then he's like, "You're resisting arrest." And I'm like, "No, I'm not," because he's on top of me. I can't move. And I couldn't even tell really what was going on, but I think a sheriff came around the door and opened the other one and is pulling on me from there. That's what it felt like. So I was being pulled from like 2 directions, and then plus a sheriff on top of me. And I kept telling him, "I can't move. I can't move. What are you doing? Get off of me." And then finally, when he realizes like he's on top of me and I can't move, then he kind of gets off of me. And then they're able to pull me out of the tractor really fast. And when I fell out of the tractor, I barely landed on one leg, but like you saw in the video, the sheriffs took most of the fall. One went flying down. And when I was about on one leg, then the sheriffs grab my neck. One jumps up and grabs me and pulls me down. And that's when I hit the ground. And then they handcuffed me, and then about when they handcuffed me and they checked my pockets and everything for weapons, which I don't have any weapons, except a knife. They call that a weapon, I guess. And that's when they stood me up, and then they explained things a little bit better, like what this is. But they still didn't tell me what the breathalyzer was for. Like, I asked like, I don't know, 20 or 30 times while I was handcuffed, and they're walking me to the cruiser to put me in. And he would not explain. He's like, "It's for public safety." That doesn't tell me that it's for alcohol. I still never even knew what it was for. And I kept asking him, "Why do I have to do a breathalyzer? For what reason?" "Yes, it's for public safety, but what is it?" And he wouldn't tell me that. And he didn't tell me I was going to be a criminal after I deny a breathalyzer. He didn't explain things like that. I'd be under arrest, or that was mandatory. I didn't know that either. Like, I've never been in a check stop in my entire life. And then I happen to be in one with a tractor. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then they stuffed me into the police cruiser, and actually before they put me in the police cruiser, they wanted to check me with an ambulance because they saw blood, and they wanted to check the sheriff to make sure he didn't get or any infections or anything from my blood or any diseases, whatever. And, you know, I haven't had food since morning. And I haven't drank anything all day either, because I don't even have time to take a drink of water. That's the number one reason why my nose started bleeding. I was really dry. And
up on your forehead here, the scar you were saying earlier, it's from the concrete?
Yeah, that's from mostly like falling on the pavement, and my face was on the ground. They were on top of me, and they're pushing my head really hard on the ground. Like, one of them's got their knee on my head, so I can't move. And after I was checked clear in the ambulance, they put me into the cruiser, and I probably sat there for 2 hours. The vehicle was turned off, so the windows weren't open. And, you know, I'm sitting there and with handcuffs on, and I'm fidgeting around trying to find a comfortable way, plus with the heat. And the sheriff comes in and out all for like 2 hours, and I keep asking him how much longer, what am I supposed to be doing here, why am I here? And that's when my parents arrived, and then that's when the situation happened with Dominic and my parents. And then finally I asked them that they finally released me and let me go to my parents. But during that whole time I asked many times to phone home, and they wouldn't give me that chance. They wouldn't let me have any chance of like water. I told them I hadn't drank or eaten for hours since morning. And most of the questions I asked him, he ignored me. He wouldn't. And he'd just say, we'll be here a little bit longer. And an hour later, a little bit longer. That's all he could say.
So now the charges, they've been dropped by the Crown. What do you think caused that, and are you pleased with how that turned out?
Well, I'm sure they saw the situation I was in and everything that happened to me, and they, all the support I'm getting, like from Rebel and everyone else. And that's mostly one of the reasons why they probably thought about dropping it, because they don't need all this trouble, especially when the court date comes. And I'm extremely pleased, because then I can get back to my normal life and stop wasting time with this situation. Yeah. So that's definitely why I'm mostly pleased. But
it's still not over yet, I guess. You still have a problem with your learner's permit, your driver's license that hasn't been returned to you, even though you don't need a driver's license to operate a tractor on a highway. That's not actually a requirement, but they've confiscated your license, or what's going on there?
Usually when they do suspend a license, they send a paper in the mail, like telling you to return your license to the nearest agency. And so that paper, as long as I have that paper, I can send that to the lawyer, and the lawyer will send it to the Alberta government and ask them why they suspended my license for no reason. And they'll look into that, and hopefully I can get my license back from there. But yeah, suspending my license has also been a problem, because now I've been trying to get my drivers for the past 2 years. And I failed once, because usually they fail you once so they make more money. And then COVID came, and then you couldn't take the test for like another couple months. And then after that I've suspended, and so I still couldn't take the test. And so now I'm in this situation hoping I can get my learners back so I can at least take the test and get my drivers, because that is very important on the farm. My learners is already important enough, because I can still drive certain vehicles like behind a tractor or something to the field. And that's been a problem. So the sooner I get my learners back, the better it is.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, and I hope that everything's healed up all right, and that it's not traumatized you. I think police generally are good in this province, but I think this interaction that you had was just so unfortunate.
Yes. I hope so, that I'm able to get back to my normal life as soon as possible.
Yeah. For sure.
And that this is over.
Has this changed how you view law enforcement in Alberta, Canada? Has it changed your perspective on them?
Yes, that's one thing I definitely wanted to mention, was the way I see sheriffs, like the Alberta police force, I definitely see that in a different way now. Like, it scares me now whenever I see a sheriff. I don't have much respect for them now because of what they've done to me.
Do you think that I mean, the video of what happened to you just on Rebel News was seen over 700,000 times. Thousands upon thousands of people in Alberta have seen what happened. Do you think that this has hurt sheriffs, and do you think they're going to change?
I hope so, that they realize that what this has caused and how many people see how their actions were. But I don't know 100% if they would change from that or not. Which I don't think they will.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Rebel News put up a link at helpjeremiah.com that redirected to their GoFundMe, that put money towards their lawyers and the tractor and the downtime and the rental tractor that they needed after the police destroyed the tractor that they were using. You can still go there and donate if you feel you need to. I want to thank the family for bringing me onto their farm. They do have a beautiful operation. They have sheep, donkeys, horses, cattle. They even had a few roosters and a few dogs. I'm sure Catherine McKenna would have been a great fan of this place. I want to thank them again for allowing me to share their story about what is going on, because the mainstream media certainly wasn't interested in doing it. They did put out a few pieces on it, but immediately that coverage died down. See, the mainstream media wasn't interested in this story at all. Sure, they sent 1 or 2 reporters out in the first place, but really their heart wasn't in this story because they don't care about rural Alberta. It was Rebel News' story, hitting over 700,000 views, that I think contributed to the social pressure against the Crown prosecutors and the Ministry of Justice that caused this to be dropped. I really think that's true, and I want to thank you, the viewer, who may have gone to helpjeremiah.com to pitch in a few bucks to help out their family, or maybe you shared the story with your friends to point out this egregious case of police brutality in rural Alberta. It's not okay wherever it happens, and even though the social justice warriors at Black Lives Matter didn't care about this at all, I'm glad that you did and you shared the story. And it's important that we let folks know that the charges were now dropped because of the pressure that was put on the government and the Crown prosecutors. In rural Alberta, just outside of Sundre, I'm Cian Bexley for Rebel News. So much for tuning into our coverage here at Rebel News. We wouldn't be able to do the job that we're doing, getting the results that we get, without your support. Take this mic, for example. Just a few days ago in Ottawa, I had my mic hurled down the street by a radical climate activist like a football because he didn't like the questions that I was asking. Because of your support, I was able to get this new mic that I could take to rural Alberta and ask this farm family a few questions. If you want to go to helprebelnews.com, you can pitch in a few bucks to keep myself and my cameraman, who's behind the camera right now, on the road covering stories that the mainstream media certainly is not.